Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast of a bunch of writers who sit around drinking tasty beverages and talk about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. Your hosts today are Chaz and Karen Brenchley and me, Jeannie Warner. This is episode 120, Interview with Brenda Clough. Welcome, Brenda.
Hi, how are you?
We are so good. It's excellent to have you. I mean, Chaz and Karen have known you forever. I met you at FogCon a few years ago when you were wearing this amazing leather coat.
I remember that. And I'm so sad that FogCon is not running. Well, I think it did run this year, but I could not come down to attend it. But I'm hoping to come later on.
Live, and I believe they're going to stick with virtual just for security because thank you, San Francisco, for being health conscious. But at least I think the online and Zoom conferences keep us all in touch with each other.
Yes, they do for now. Yeah, I'm glad that FogCon is doing that, but I miss it very, very much.
So, Brenda, you have, as near as I can tell, something really exciting that you've been doing here in 2021 with all of your novels. Tell us about the really cool serial project that you've been releasing. This is new. Brenda's an amazing novelist.
Well, I'm best known for writing science fiction and fantasy, but my muse took a left turn about 4 or 5 years ago, and I began writing a series of Victorian thrillers. And all of these are essentially the sequel to The Woman White by Wilkie Collins, a famous proto-feminist novel and also the one of the founding books of the thriller genre. And at that moment, one of the major characters in that novel was Miss Marian Halcombe, the sister of the heroine. And she kicked some fairly serious ass in the book. And mysteriously, I don't understand it, Wilkie Collins never wrote a sequel. There clearly was market for it because the actual novel itself was a bestseller in its period. There were people ripping it off and there were people putting it on stage. And so it was clearly a hit. Why did he not write sequels? Clearly something had to be done. And so I took it in hand and I wrote 11 novels. And then since I had 11 of them, I decided to do a cute marketing thing and put one a month out in the year 2021. So the first one came out in January and we're about 3/4 of the way in. And the last one's scheduled to come out in November. And this allows everybody to sort of binge read the whole thing. And it should be interesting to see how that works out in hopes that it'll be popular. It is sort of not like anything else that's out at this moment, I don't think.
I was going to say, I like this whole idea of serial releases again. I saw it in novella forms for like Seanan McGuire's Indexing, and a few others have been doing it, but I like it done on the novel stage. And especially that it's not, I mean, I've seen like the Shifter romance novel series that Zoe Chant Collective is doing, but to have one that one author did, first of all, 11 novels, holy crap, lady, that's amazing. But secondly, I do like this, hey, there's a new one, because I don't know about anybody else, but during lockdown, I have been binge reading everything. And so I think this has been great. Have the sales reflected enthusiasm for this?
I haven't the faintest idea. One of the things I'm not a marketer. I don't even look at the statistics, but I'm counting on people to buy them. And I will say, a particularly evil thing, the first one is free, like many entry-level drugs. You can go over to bookviewcafe.com and get it for free, forever. It's perma-free. And then if you're hooked, there's 10 more in the pipeline.
So are they all electronic or do you have hard copy versions or?
Well, because I was doing 11 of them, it was like so brutal, as Chaz can tell you. And so I couldn't face the idea of pushing them out in paper format. I figured I would push them all out in ebook form. And then what we're going to do is there's going to be the Kindle debut probably next year when they can all come out in one horrible effort. And then after that, I may push through into the paper edition. I just couldn't, doing 11 of them, one a month, has just about, it's just barely doable, but I don't think I could do 11 electronic and paper at the same time. I think it would kill me.
How long did it take you to write 11 freaking books, even with a passion for the subject?
Well, it takes longer than a month, I'll tell you that. That's why I had to have them all lined up first, so that all I needed to focus now on was the ebook edition and the layout and all of this kind of stuff. I would say that I've been writing roughly, it takes about 9 or 10 months to actually write one, beginning to end. And then that means that I've been working on them. Well, that's not fair to say. I did a calculation the other day, and in the past decade, I have written 14 novels. So I'm just kind of sort of hot at this
Wow,
moment.
that's definitely that's more than one a year.
I
Yes.
know that's about right. I can do about more than one a year.
Do you do word counts for yourself, or how do you keep yourself on task for all that?
I don't know.
Mm.
I really, truly do not know. I
Okay.
just sort of sit down and do it. As long as I can think of something to happen, we can do it. And I will say that the form of these books has helped to do that, because they've got a reasonably rigid format. It starts mundane, and we start getting more and more. Chaz can testify to this. They get more and more crazy as you get into the work, and then the next volume we begin again with relatively mundane stuff before things begin to go around the corner.
A Most Dangerous Woman. Everybody will put a link on the thing to it.
Yeah, the first one is titled Marian Halcombe, and you can find it on Bookview Cafe.
So is it all about Marian Halcombe, or does she gather together a merry band of as they go along to help her, fight crime or whatever? Is it just her as the main?
Well, she has, you have to have your team, Batman needs Robin, James Bond needs Q, and so forth. So she has one of the things I wanted to do, because all of these things are set relatively rigidly in the 1860s and 70s and 80s, quite tightly historical. And so she can only operate within her society as it was then. And so she had to have a husband, because it's very difficult at that period for an unmarried lady to do anything. And if you're having a husband, gives you immediately a rich fields of endeavor. I would say that her first husband, Theo, is kidnapped not once, not twice, but at least 3 times. And then when you're married, he had children from his previous wife, and there are more children over here, and there's political stuff over there. And so simply by complicating her life a little bit, a lot of stuff goes on. I would say that, in fairness, Marian does not actually go and seek adventure the way, let us say, James Bond does. She is allegedly sitting there being a nice Victorian mother and housewife, and stuff just sort of kind of happens. And then when she does, naturally, she has to address it, and then hijinks ensue.
Yes, they do.
Excellent.
How did you approach this differently than you have some of your past? Like, I love your How Like a God series that came out, which is very, I don't know, it's kind of a crossover, a little bit sci-fi, a little bit fantasy, both. But how do you approach something that was the historical? Did you do a ton of research rather than world building? Give me a hint of how you went and approached it.
I'm annoyingly well read, and so that sort of helps. And the other thing is that there's a lot of material on the subject. The 19th century is just far enough away that it's completely alien to us, but it's not so far away that you can't get a whole bunch of newspaper archives and many, many photographs and lots of fun things. So it's not as difficult as, let us say, writing about Mesopotamia. I guess it just sort of came naturally. It's not that difficult. And I was able to cozen a trip to London out of this, and I went to visit some of the major sites of the novels. And, I think that doing science fiction helps you to do this kind of thing. Oh, and I guess the other fair thing to say was, I wrote a novel in the 2000, and it was titled, darn it, now it'll come back to me. It's titled Revise the World. And it was an extension of the novella that I wrote that actually was a finalist for the Hugo and the Nebula. This novella was about Titus Oates. Do you know Titus Oates?
Yes.
He was the man who went with Robert Scott's party to discover the South Pole, and the Norwegians beat him, so they walked back. And he is the one who when they're in a blizzard and there was no food whatsoever. And so to save the life of the rest of his party, he walked out into the blizzard saying, "I'm just stepping out, and maybe sometime." Such a British thing to do.
Yeah.
So I wrote an entire novel about him, which became a space opera, which is how come it was, it was time travel. And so what I did for that was not only did I read everything that I could find about the Scott Party, but I believe that I read everything that was ever written by anyone who went to Antarctica in that period. And they all wrote memoirs, you understand. Every single one of them had journals, they had memoirs, they tell you all about it. And by that time, I had gotten my hand well in with Edwardian and Victorian, and I could just slide into the voice.
Right. Did you have a relationship with the woman in particularly before you started this?
Well, it's a great book. And there was a great dramatization on BBC in the 90s that was, it was one of those things when they would serialize it, and it was like totally gripping. And they made it again into a movie a few years ago that was frankly not very good. It's sort of like one of those classic Hardy perennials. It's just going to be around forever.
Sounds good. Sounds very interesting.
It really is. It's a lovely read on its own. And when it, now you can read it knowing that there are 11 more of these things to come, which get wilder and wackier book by book.
Well, what is sad is because I'm deeply and at root a science fiction and fantasy novelist, it took to about book 10 or 11 before the fantasy finally creeps up to the surface.
Oh, really?
We are able to keep it completely beaten back for 10 volumes. But by the time we get to volume 11, which you really should read, Chaz,
it's the one I haven't read yet.
Yeah, this is the last one, the one you haven't read. And it does begin to shift over into fantasy, because once you're in Southeast Asia and trying to placate the Cobras to win the throne, then it starts to get, you can have magic. Why not?
Absolutely.
Well, I generally think, if it comes to it, you can have magic. Why not? It just fits into any environment. I think that's one of those perennial kind of givens. If you want magic.
I once had a long argument with a friend in a car because he propounded that you could have science fiction and you could have magic. You couldn't have magic in a science fiction novel.
On behalf of Sherry S. Tepper,
yep.
To you.
Yeah, he's just wrong.
Yeah.
He's so fundamentally wrong. It makes no sense at all to say you can have magic in a contemporary novel, but not in one that's set 50 years hence. Yeah.
Yeah, because the magic just suddenly disappeared.
Yep.
Which, and if you're going to, you could do that, but first you'd have to write the novel that clearly explained what the magic was and how it disappeared.
Yeah, Larry Niven's done that.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I think that if you're dealing with the form, if it's a hard science fiction novel, clearly it's a cheat to suddenly pull magic out of the hat.
Yeah.
And with these books, I've tried not to depart too far from the form and completely discombobulate the reader. So there's things people don't understand, and everybody in Southeast Asia, where they happen to be at the moment, are saying, well, but it's magic. Everybody knows that the snakes are magic. But everyone who's come over from England says, oh, there's got to be a rational explanation. And there always is. But there's that question, was it really magic or not? Oh.
Now, you briefly mentioned something that we have not talked hugely about. You've been very active with the Book View Cafe. Tell people about the Book View Cafe in general.
Well, what I think that we've been doing this for like 15 or some years or now, and I cannot remember. Originally, a bunch of writers, if you're a best-selling author, if you're Stephen King or George R. R. Martin, there's not a lot of problems with your backlist. But if you wrote a novel in 1984 and if it didn't make all that much money, they let it go out of print. And then there's sort of like nothing you can do with it. And so the original plan was to get together and cooperatively publish our backlist books. And everybody had, a couple of novels that, ran around in paperback for a while and then were not reprinted and essentially are unavailable unless you're willing to go into the used bookstores and dig. Or now you can go onto eBay and search and buy the book used. But you had this material. Let's think of a way to monetize it. Okay. And that was just when ebooks were coming up. And so the idea was it wouldn't be a heavy lift because the book already existed at one point in time. You owned the rights. It had already been, edited and proofread and stuff because it had already been published by, Daw or Bain or whatever. and then you could push it out again and make more money. And this is a noble and laudable goal. I'm sure everyone agrees. And so we went and did that for a while. And then, of course, from there to shoving out original material was not terribly difficult.
And it's totally a cooperative thing. We don't go outside the group for any skill set because we have it all between us. So, I'm Brenda's proofreader and converter into English.
From English to American.
Yes. Yeah, and we have cover designers. We have the blessed people who take our texts and typeset them and so on and format them and so on and so forth. And it all happens within the house.
Some bits occasionally are fished out, particularly the book covers. We've tinkered with those, and I've done some book covers myself for the group. But frequently it works better if you, particularly if you have a specific genre you want addressed. It's sometimes easier to hire someone outside to actually do the design. We're brilliant, but we're not actually really, really brilliant.
Where do you go looking? Do you go on like Fiverr or, in looking for...
You can do that, and I have friends who are artists. You ask friends, and then they fish up somebody. I have actually painted some paintings that for Bookview Cafe's covers, and then, someone else figures out a way to put the title and the author and that kind of thing on. So you can do that. I can help with the finding of an actual graphic, but to turn it into a cover is sort of a separate art form.
Going back to your process in general, because you're clearly have been very prolific, are you more of a organic writer, or do you outline form and then fill in your lines? How do you go about it?
It's a spectrum, and all the way on the far side, on one side are the people who are planners, and they outline it. I had a friend once who outlined the work down to the paragraph level, which would kill me stone dead. I would cut my wrists. I'm all the way on the other side of the spectrum, far, far on the other side. I'm a fly by the pants kind of a writer, and I do not plan anything. I have no idea when I begin where the book's going to end. And I could almost avow that I have no idea what the next paragraph is going to be when I'm sitting here and looking at the thing. But it's sort of like knitting. You grab the end of the yarn and you pull. And if you keep on going and there's a lot of yarn there, you cast on and knit and you keep on knitting until the yarn's gone. And if the yarn is not gone, we keep on knitting.
So did you have any idea when you started Marian Holcomb that there would be 11 of them?
No. I had the foggiest idea. In fact, I wrote the first one and had no idea that there was going to be a second. And I think it's fair to say that until fairly later on, I had no idea that there was ever going to be another. At one point, the whole series was going to end at about like number 7, The Nautilus Night. And it actually came to a nice ending point. And I said, I could walk away from this thing right now, except that I didn't. And now I think that even now, if you read number 11, it's not entirely clear. It is over. And a case could be made that the number 12 is a nicer number for a series, and that I should write one more that slots in there. And if I do that, and if there's sufficient demand for pirates in the South China Sea, I have to fix on a spot within the timeline to wedge in an entire novel about pirates in the South China Sea. And possibly I could do that.
What about Christmas pirates in the South China Sea for December?
Well, the thing is that I haven't begun writing it now. It being, what is it now? It's the middle of September. I cannot get it done by then.
Well, the thing is, this is something that, you've been doing one a month, but that doesn't mean that you have to stop now. I mean, if you do decide to do another one, a few months later or in a couple of years, you want to do another 3 or 4. There you go. It's too bad that it is 11, which is such a, it's a prime number.
But it's okay.
But if you had 12, you could have a 1-year thing in a boxed set. Although I don't know if a box set really works on an ebook, but you could, you could.
But there are 12 because Woman in White is clearly the first.
Oh, yeah.
Number 0.
It's true. And Paul Wilkie Collins is now public domain,
Exactly. Yeah. So you can publish him as well.
Well, it is. I'm not sure I would do that, but I will say that yes, he could be the ghost 12th in there. Romance novelists frequently do that. There's, your 5, romance novels about, the five sisters of Elizabeth Bennet, let us say, or something.
Mm.
And then they box them all, and it's a virtual box set.
Yes.
And you buy in on them, you throw $20 at it and you get all 4 volumes or whatever it is.
That makes some sense.
I should do it. I really should do it. But what happened was, after I wrote number 11 and I began writing what could have been number 12, but then I told Jen, which was kind of a mistake, that I said, it's not going to be set in the same time period, and it's not going to have the same characters, and it's going to be different in tone and prose style. And she said, then it can't be in the series. What you have done, Brenda, is you have started a new series. So write 11 more in this milieu, and then we'll have another series. And I said,
I love
okay,
Jen.
Jen, and I'm working on it.
Yeah, well done, Jen. Well done, Jen. I think.
Well, so I'm going to write at least a few, and all of this current lot will be set in the 1950s or 60s. But then at some point we'll go back to crinolines and bustle gowns, and maybe we'll wedge another 12th one in there. But it is not going to be anytime really soon.
Is this Britain in the 50s, or have we moved to America?
Yes, actually, we are in America. I wrote the first one, and it is about, I guess this guy is going to be, it winds up to be either Marion's grandson or his great-grandson. I forget which it is. But he went through World War II and is trying to recover from it.
Right.
And so it's actually rather cool, because it is a novel about disability and trauma and getting better from it. And I don't know if you know Deb Ross, but she's a writer. And I think she lives in Washington State. But she is also does a lot of
in Boulder Canyon near us here in California.
Oh, does she? Okay, well then I'm have my compass reversed. But she actually beta read it, because I said it's about a guy who went through the war and is trying to recover. And we're going, because I said you'd be ideal to look at this, and so she has actually read it for me, and that is good, because we'll have to see how this works out.
I love it for the idea of taking a character and then running with it. I mean, I think back of Fraser's Flashman that he did after Tom Brown's School Days, and the Flashman novels, I have to admit, they're like sliding into an old friend. So I appreciate this is like Chaz did with his Crater Schools, of taking something that you love, and it's like, this had this character that I feel, deserves their own world.
And it's nice to have a whole series about them. It's like the Lord Peter Wimsey novels is another good example. They're more or less chronological. They're more or less follow his life through. But there's, it doesn't, we're not going, a day by day, blah, 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 minute by minute kind of a thing. Only the interesting bits.
Yes. Yeah. That's a good point.
I was thinking of people that have written long series with the same characters but mucked with time, like the Nero Wolfe series, that it was always Nero and Archie, but it could be anywhere on any time period.
Well, that is Nero Wolfe and Archie are sort of like, that one feature is very like how they do it in the comic books. Yeah. Think of Superman and his girlfriend, Lois Lane, his best friend, Jimmy Olsen, Perry White, the editor. So Superman has his tiny little core of persons that are actually connected to him. And he goes forward in time. He's always roughly in his 30s. Superman never gets white hair. And also this little circle of people stay with him in their relative age positions. Lois is always a hair younger. Jimmy is a hair younger yet. Perry White is always older. His parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, are always older. So there's a sort of like this time stasis bubble that keeps them together in their relationship chronologically. But this whole bubble moves forward through time as the comic books progress. Exactly. And so in the original Superman, Jonathan Kent, his adoptive father, was a World War I veteran. And gradually, as the years went on, that war slipped suddenly. Jonathan Kent fought at Anzio in World War II. Fairly recently, he was in the Korean War. And I do not doubt right now he is a Vietnam War veteran. And in another 10 years, he would have been in Kabul at the fall of Afghanistan.
Or Desert Shield.
He himself, the whole bubble moves forward in time so that at any given moment, the comic books can be very current. And so Nero and Archie were also doing that. They moved forward in time, not aging, but gradually, suddenly it's World War II, but I'm not 80 years old. I'm still the same age that I ever was. And no one sort of notices that, because they're just sort of sliding forward in their whole social set together.
Right. There's a There's an extreme example of that kind of literary game in the school stories of Antonia Forrest, because I mean she was, for a traditional English school story writer, she was the very opposite of prolific, and she'd bring out a book, once every 8 or 10 years, but she always set them currently, contemporaneously. So like sort of the early ones are in the 50s, and then they're in the 60s, and then they're in the 70s. But within the context of the stories, it's one school term after another. So it's really peculiar. If you read them all at once, you're time skipping like a stone bouncing over a lake all the time.
But do the students stay the same?
They are aging term by term.
Okay.
But all their experiences have been different.
Okay.
Also, the same thing with James Bond. He's not stuck in the 1960s or the 1970s. He now has modern technology and whatever it is, but he is still James Bond. He hasn't aged out.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes it in its own way back to what you were saying. Is it magic, or is it just a flexibility of writing? I mean, I love the idea that you've got this character and that you can kind of take it anywhere, anytime. I mean, we have current Benedict Cumberbatch playing a really beautiful Sherlock Holmes that we've all fallen in love with. Why not?
Well, Holmes is a really good example of somebody who has become completely iconic. They say that they polled people, even in Central African jungles and on the taiga and in Mongolia. And Sherlock Holmes is one of the characters that is recognized by everybody worldwide. The other one who's everybody recognizes is Mickey Mouse. And so if you get to that level of icon, then surely you're immortal and you can be anywhere. And, the number of Sherlock Holmes spin-off novels must be just about infinite.
I would also like to say that James Bond, because he's a secret agent, there's a different man in all these different shows. They may actually be Bob Smith, but when they join the Secret Service, they are told their name is now James Bond 007. And, so that's kind of how I think of them. He's
so
not.
It's like the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Exactly.
Exactly. Why don't you be the Dread Pirate Roberts now? I'm about done.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of how I think of James Bond.
He's a persona rather than a person.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a question here that was, because you are mostly a novelist, as you keep saying over and over again, you still write short stories sometimes. For instance, you have one in one of my favorite short stories anthology, How Beer Saved the World.
Oh, really? Yes, that was a fun one, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean, it was hilarious. How do you approach a short story differently than you do a novel?
It helps a lot if someone says to me, Brenda, we need a short story about beer. Get it in gear. Yeah. Because I don't usually sit down and say, I'm going to write a short story. But if someone turns to me and says, and someone actually did this, I don't know, Chaz, if you know Mike Ventrella, but he is.
I have never met him.
He edits short story collections. And at some point in the past, he got the idea that there should be an alternate Beatles collection. I like the Beatles, but I didn't think I needed to write about them. And so I paid no attention when he put out a market listing. I'm looking for short stories about alternate Beatles. And then I don't know exactly what happened, but I think he was flooded with short stories in which John Lennon did not die. Yeah. And then finally he got fed up with it. And he said, Brenda, you have to do something. And I said, well, you've already had the one about John Lennon not dying. And he said, I am knee deep in them. And so I think that this must have been on the fly. I said, have you had the one about George Harrison saving the world with tantric sex? And he said, that one I have not had. You had better write it. And then I was
I love it. I love it.
Well, what was frightening about that one was I sort of had the idea on the fly, but when I dug into George Harrison's history, luckily the man is dead, it all dovetailed perfectly with his life and his known, character interests. And so it was clearly meant to be. And so I just did it.
What are you working on now?
Well, I'm writing this post-World War. The reason I got into post-World War II was I knew if I kept on writing Victorian novels, I would be my well of English would be completely polluted, and I would forever be writing in orotund sentences with many dependent clauses and lots of polysyllabic words, and I couldn't hack it. So I had to get out, and the way to do this was to write something, to try to switch over to a very Ernest Hemingway style. We were going to do short declarative sentences with not a lot of adjectives or adverbs, and it was going to be we weren't going to describe all the angst. It was just all going to be like sort of in this over to one side, not telling you about it, but you could tell that he was suffering because he was drinking a lot. That kind of a book.
I love it. I love it.
I don't know if it's going to work out or not, but we will see. And we're slopping around on this right now. Jen said, describe the plot of the second one to Jen. And she said, Brenda, it is clearly a romance novel. And if it is a romance novel, you need, and she produced this list of things that it had to have. You know that romance novels have their own structure and canon. It's something like kabuki theater at this point. You have to do certain things at a certain time in a certain way. And there's lists about this. And
I'm really stubborn and cynical about this. I don't think you have to do it at all.
Well, I don't have to do it, but the sort of the challenge of saying that certain beats have to be met. You have to have this certain kind of crisis. Apparently, romance writers spend all their time talking about this, but in a proper romance novel, the characters have to earn their happily ever after that they achieve at the end of the book. And you can't just like have the deus ex machina drop it on you. You have to suffer and earn it. And so, fine, we're working on that, which sounds, reasonable to me. And so it's sort of a challenge to write it to meet this canon. And I'm not certain it's actually going to work out. I'm watching it get it the bit between its teeth, and we're going to turn left and completely gallop across this. Yeah. But it's fine. If it does that, it'll be very interesting.
Given your history with novels and your avowed insistence on just sitting down and writing and not knowing where the thing is going, I cannot see you working well within the strictures that
formula,
especially formula romance would seek to impose on you. And I don't think you should.
Yeah, well, I've experimented with outlines imposed upon me by other people. Yeah. And sometimes mostly it does not work well, but it has, I've also been informed that you could actually be more productive if you had worked with an outline, because it saves you from wandering into the dead ends where the whole thing grinds to a halt and you have to ditch 40,000 words because it is clearly going nowhere. And I am not certain that they are not right. And so I'm sort of flirting with it, but in a little while, I trust the muse will take charge of the thing and then we'll just head off into the left field.
Yes.
I have actually had really, really good luck with that. And you can sort of see the moment if you have read How Like a God, Jeannie. If you've read How Like a God, you can sort of put your finger on the moment when the book turns left and starts heading for the tall timber.
Yes,
and it is, that's the best time for a writer when the book says, I am not being what you think it's going to be. We are going way the hell and gone.
And I think, honestly, by going to hell and gone, that's how you got sequels out of it, too. Because at the beginning, I was thinking, this is going to be a standalone book. Because when I first read it, years ago, I'm like, and it stands alone. And then I got to the end, I'm like, it doesn't.
Well, you know what is annoying about those? There's two books. There's How Like a God, and there's The Doors of Death and Life. And I should tell you that I've written two other sequels to that. The Tor would not play ball. And I still have them. And I keep on saying every year, I should shove these out through Bookview Cafe. Yes. And one of these years I will.
Can you get them?
Mail them to me and I'll PayPal you or something, because girls have
it would help if they were in better shape. But in the next one, because the whole issue of immortality is kind of irritating for Eddie. So he joins a circus. And I've always wanted to write about circuses. And he does the whole thing, the elephants and the lions and stuff. And he plays the calliope for the circus horses. And then I wrote another one for him because you remember how the theater is really dead. It's the Simon and Garfunkel song. The theater is really dead. So I decided I really would kill the theater. It's dead. Live theater is dead. But Eddie is going to bring it back. And they were going to write a musical. And I went and I went over to do some world building or something. And I came back and the character said, well, we decided to stage a musical and it's going to be Oklahoma. I said, you can't do that. You know, I'd have to get the rights from the Hammerstein organization and they would never let me do that. And then the character said, well, fine, you have to think of something. And I couldn't think of the simplest way to address the issue that I could think of was to write the book and the lyrics for a musical. I couldn't compose the score, but I don't need the score. This is a novel. Yes. So I composed the book and the lyrics, the dummy lyrics for a musical for them to stage. And they did. And then, and by the way, the whole plot of the novel is grinding along while they're doing this.
Yes.
And then what I really needed to do at that moment was to find someone to write the score, but Stephen Sondheim wasn't available.
That's too bad.
I'll have a word with
total bummer.
Absolutely.
I now have to say, so Brenda, short story novelist, librettist, thank you so much for coming onto our show today. That's amazing. And I want to go listen to your musical now.
Well, I need someone to write the score. I really do. But it was a ducky concept for a musical, and I'm sure it's stageable. But I need someone to write the score. And then, of course, someone has to produce it. That would be very complex.
That is. But we will put links to all of these things that we've mentioned on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. You can also find us on Facebook or Twitter. We answer email. Brenda, if somebody has questions for you on follow-up on this, can they go ahead and reach out to you?
I have a web page, and there's an email link to it from there. It's brendaclough.net.
We will put it on our website.
Great.
Thank you so much for having us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yes, it's been great talking to you.
It really has. You are always a delight. And out there, you've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web support magic is brought to you by Deirdre Schween, and our sound engineer and backup web spider is David Welsh. Our intro music is Pretty Maid Milking the Cow, and our exit music is Breakfast with a Morning Person, both by Michael Engberg. Our podcast sponsor is Eternally Jackal Designs. And hey, thanks for listening.